Welcome to another Deep Dog, everybody. Today we're going to be taking a close look at the 2020 Scrum Guide.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the one
Love
by
that.
Ken Schreiber and Jeff Sutherland.
The famous one?
It's basically like the Bible for anyone who wants to really, get into the nitty-gritty of Scrum.
Yeah.
That framework for dealing with all these crazy, complicated projects we have these days.
Right.
But in like a really sleek and streamlined way.
Mm-hmm.
I'm excited to really, dive deep into this and see how it can help us break down some of these core principles and practices.
Absolutely.
What stands out to you about the Scrum Guide as we kind of embark on this journey together?
Well, one of the things that's always struck me about the Scrum Guide is that it's intentionally incomplete.
Really?
Yeah, like it gives you the foundation.
Okay.
But it's really encouraging teams to take that foundation and build upon it with their own intelligence.
Oh, interesting.
And their own experiences. So, it's not like a rule book.
Right.
It's more like a set of guidelines. It's like a recipe where you can add your own special ingredient.
I love that. That's a perfect analogy, I think.
Yeah.
So let's start with the basics.
Okay.
For someone who's listening who maybe has never even heard of Scrum before,
Okay.
how would you explain it to them?
So Scrum, at its core, is a lightweight framework, and it's designed to help teams generate value.
Oh,
It's all about finding solutions to complex problems, which, let's face it, is pretty much every project these days.
Days for sure.
Right?
Absolutely.
Oh.
Yeah, and I've heard it's a very iterative approach.
Yes.
Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, so instead of trying to map out every single step from the start, you break the work down into smaller chunks called sprints.
Sprints.
And these sprints allow for inspection and adaptation.
Okay.
So you're constantly learning and adjusting.
So it's not like a waterfall method where you have to plan out the entire thing.
Exactly.
From beginning to end.
Yeah, it's much more adaptable to change.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense.
Which is essential in today's world.
Yeah, it's like taking a road trip and knowing your destination, but you're open to taking different routes.
Exactly.
Along the way.
Yeah, and that adaptability is where the 3 pillars of Scrum come in.
Okay.
Transparency, inspection, and adaptation.
I love that.
Yeah.
Let's dive into those pillars a little bit.
Sure.
So transparency seems very important.
Absolutely.
Especially in today's work environments where it's all about collaboration.
Yes.
But how do teams achieve that true transparency?
Yeah, so transparency in Scrum goes beyond just sharing information.
Okay.
It's about making sure all work and processes are visible and understandable to everyone involved. This means not only sharing progress, but also being upfront about roadblocks, challenges, and even failures.
Wow, so really like airing out all the dirty laundry.
Pretty much.
Oh.
And it requires building a culture of trust where team members feel comfortable speaking up and sharing their perspectives.
So it's really creating a safe space for open and honest dialogue.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
What about inspection? How does that come into play?
Yeah, so Scrum uses specific events,
Okay.
like the daily Scrum and the sprint review, as opportunities to inspect progress and adapt accordingly.
Okay.
Think of them as built-in checkpoints to make sure you're still on course and to make any necessary adjustments.
So they're kind of like those moments where you can course correct if needed.
Exactly.
All right. And then adaptation is where you actually make those changes based on what you learned during inspection.
Precisely. And it requires empowered and self-managing teams
Oh, that's interesting.
who can adjust their plans and processes without needing constant approval from higher-ups.
Wow. So there's a lot of trust involved
A lot of trust, yeah.
in that team.
And that can be a challenge for
Yeah.
organizations that are used to a more traditional top-down approach.
So it's really a shift in mindset
It is.
from the traditional way of working.
Absolutely.
Now, I know that the Scrum Guide also emphasizes some core values. I'm curious to hear how those values contribute to successful Scrum implementation.
Right, so the Scrum Guide highlights 5 core values.
Okay.
Commitment focus, openness, respect, and courage.
Those are great values.
These values create the foundation for a healthy Scrum environment.
Okay.
For example, without courage, teams might hesitate to adapt even when they see a better way of doing things.
That's a good point.
Or without openness, true transparency becomes difficult to achieve.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it's not just about the processes, it's about fostering the right mindset and culture.
So it's really a holistic approach.
Yes, very much so.
Now let's talk about the people involved.
Okay.
Who are the key players in this Scrum ecosystem?
Well, the basic unit of Scrum is the Scrum team.
Okay.
It's a small, self-managing group with all the skills needed to create value.
So it's a very empowered team.
Yes, very much so.
And there's no real hierarchy within the team?
No hierarchies, just a shared commitment to the goal.
Now that sounds like a dream team.
Oh.
But how does a team with no hierarchy actually function?
That's where the 3 specific roles within the Scrum team come in.
Yeah.
We have the developers, the product owner, and the Scrum Master.
Okay, let's break those down a little bit.
Sure.
So who are the developers?
So the term developers in Scrum encompasses anyone who's involved in creating the product.
So it's not just software developers.
No, it could include designers, writers, testers,
Okay.
and yes, software developers, of course.
Right, so anybody who's involved in actually building the product.
Exactly. It's about having all the necessary skills within the team to get things done.
So it's a cross-functional team.
Yes, very much so.
Okay, what about the product owner?
The product owner is the voice of the customer.
Okay.
They're responsible for maximizing the value that the Scrum team delivers. This means having a deep understanding of the market, the users, and the product's overall goals.
So they're kind of like the captain of the ship,
You could say that.
making sure everyone's going in the right direction?
Yeah. They're responsible for the product backlog, which is a prioritized list of everything that needs to be done to improve the product.
Okay, but doesn't that create a bottleneck sometimes?
Yeah.
If you have one person?
That's a good point. It's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
The product owner needs to be a strong leader, but also collaborative.
Okay.
A good product owner trusts the team's expertise and empowers them to make decisions.
So it's not a dictatorship?
No, definitely not.
Okay, good to know.
It's a partnership.
What about the Scrum Master? What do they do?
The Scrum Master is a fascinating role.
Okay.
They're not a manager in the traditional sense.
Okay.
Instead, they act as a servant leader, guiding and supporting the team
Okay.
without dictating their every move.
Interesting.
They help remove any impediments to the team's progress, facilitate Scrum events, and coach the team in self-management
Okay.
and Scrum principles.
So they're like the glue that holds the team together,
Yeah, you could say that.
ensuring everyone is on the same page.
Exactly.
Working effectively.
Yeah, they help the team to be the best they can be.
Now, have you ever seen situations where that role maybe becomes a hindrance rather than a help?
Definitely, if a Scrum Master becomes too controlling or tries to micromanage the team,
Okay.
it can stifle creativity and slow down progress.
Right.
The key is finding that balance between guidance and empowerment. Remember, the Scrum Master serves the team, not the other way around.
It's about enabling the team to reach their full potential.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about the team, we've talked about the values.
Yeah.
How does the work actually get done?
So the Scrum Guide mentions something called Scrum events.
Okay, Scrum events.
These are the heartbeat of the process.
Right.
They provide a regular cadence for transparency, inspection, and adaptation. And all of these events happen within a time-boxed iteration called a sprint, which typically lasts a month or less.
Okay, a sprint.
A sprint.
So it's like you're sprinting towards a goal?
Exactly. You're focused.
You're a month.
You have a clear goal in mind.
I'd love to hear more about what happens during a sprint.
Okay, well, the sprint is where all the action happens. It's where the team takes a selection of items from the product backlog and works to turn them into a usable increment of value.
Okay.
But to understand the flow of the sprint, we need to talk about the specific events that take place within it.
Okay, I'm ready.
Right.
What's the first event that kicks off a sprint?
So it all starts with sprint planning.
Compressing.
This is where the entire Scrum team gets together,
Whole team.
the whole team,
Okay.
to decide what they're going to achieve during the sprint and how they're going to achieve it.
So it's like a collaborative brainstorming session.
Exactly.
Okay.
Where the team maps out their game plan for the sprint.
And how long does that usually last?
So sprint planning is time-boxed to a maximum of 8 hours for a 1-month sprint.
Okay. So you want to spend too much time planning.
No, the idea is to be focused and efficient.
Right. Get a plan and go.
Yep.
Okay, so once the plan is in place, what happens next?
Then comes the daily Scrum.
Daily Scrum.
This is a short 15-minute daily meeting for the developers to check in with each other, inspect their progress, and adapt their plan as needed.
So it's like a daily huddle.
Exactly, like a quick touch base.
Okay, to make sure everybody's on the same page.
Yeah. Are there any roadblocks do we need to adjust the plan?
What have you observed about those daily scrums? What
Yeah.
are some of the things that can go wrong?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Or things that teams should watch out for?
One thing I've seen is that daily scrums can sometimes turn into status reporting sessions.
Oh, yeah, just like checking boxes.
Yeah, where people just read off their to-do lists.
Right.
But the real power of the daily scrum is in its ability to foster collaboration and problem solving.
So it should be more about what are the challenges we're facing and how can we help each other?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about having those conversations and working together as a team.
Got it.
And the Scrum Master plays a key role in facilitating those conversations and ensuring that everyone feels comfortable speaking up.
So it's a safe space to raise concerns or ask for help.
Absolutely.
Now, what happens at the end of the sprint? Is there a big celebration?
Well, there are two events that mark the end of the sprint.
Okay.
The sprint review and the sprint retrospective.
Okay, so let's talk about the sprint review first. What is that all about?
The sprint review is like a show and tell,
Okay.
where the Scrum team demonstrates the increment they've created during the sprint to stakeholders.
Okay.
It's a chance to get feedback, celebrate successes, and discuss potential next steps.
So it's not just presenting a finished product.
No, it's about having a conversation about the value that's been delivered
Right.
and getting input from stakeholders.
So it's very interactive.
Very interactive, yeah.
And what about the sprint retrospective?
The sprint retrospective is a dedicated time for the Scrum team to reflect on the sprint
Okay.
and identify areas for improvement.
Okay.
It's a chance to ask questions like, what went well? What could we have done better? How can we improve our process for the next sprint?
So it's a very inward-looking kind of event
Is.
where the team's really looking at how they can improve their own processes.
Exactly. It's about continuous improvement.
Okay.
And the Scrum Master often acts as a facilitator during the sprint retrospective,
Right.
ensuring that everyone has a voice and helping the team to identify actionable steps.
So it's not just about complaining.
No, it's about finding solutions
Okay.
and making things better.
It's about turning those reflections into action.
Exactly.
Now we've got these sprint events that provide a framework for the work.
Yes.
But what about the actual deliverables? The Scrum Guide mentioned some artifacts.
Right.
Can we unpack those a little bit?
Sure. Scrum uses three primary artifacts:
Okay.
the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the increment.
Okay, I'm ready.
All right.
Let's start with the product backlog. You mentioned it briefly before.
Yes.
But what exactly is it and how does it work in practice?
So the product backlog is the heart of the product vision.
Okay.
It's a living document.
A living document.
Yes. It's constantly evolving,
Okay.
and it contains a prioritized list of everything that needs to be done to improve the product.
So it's like the master to-do list?
You could say that, yeah.
Uh-huh.
It's the source of truth for what needs to be built.
And who's in charge of managing that?
The product owner is the ultimate custodian of the product backlog.
Okay.
They're responsible for ensuring that it's transparent, visible, and understood by everyone.
So they're like the keeper of the backlog.
Exactly.
They-
They work closely with stakeholders
Mhm.
to understand their needs, prioritize items,
Yeah.
and refine the backlog.
So it's not just a static list.
No, it's dynamic,
It's constantly being updated.
constantly evolving.
And it has a guiding star as well, right?
It does. It's called the product goal.
Okay, tell me about the product goal.
So the product goal describes the long-term objective for the product.
Okay.
It's the ultimate destination you're trying to reach.
Okay.
It provides strategic direction
Mhm.
and helps ensure that everything the team does is aligned with that overall vision.
So the product backlog is like the roadmap,
Yes,
and the product goal is the destination.
that's a great way to put it.
So how does the sprint backlog fit into all of this?
The sprint backlog is the team's plan of attack for the sprint.
Okay.
It includes the sprint goal,
Mm.
a selection of items from the product backlog that they'll be working on, and a plan for how they're going to achieve that sprint goal.
So it's like a subset of the product backlog
Exactly.
that's focused on that particular sprint.
Exactly. And you mentioned the sprint goal. Is that similar to the product goal, but on a smaller scale?
Exactly. The sprint goal is the single objective for the sprint.
Okay.
It keeps the team focused and ensures that they're all working towards a common goal.
Got it. So you've always got something concrete you're working towards, both in the short term and the long term.
Precisely.
And what's the result of all this effort?
The result of the sprint is the increment.
The increment. A tangible piece of working product that delivers value.
Okay, so this is where the rubber meets the road.
Yes. This is where those ideas from the product backlog become something real.
Something you can actually see and touch.
Exactly.
So it's not just about completing tasks, it's about delivering something of value.
Precisely.
But how do we know if it's actually good?
That's where the definition of done comes in.
Okay, the definition of done.
This is a shared understanding within the Scrum team of what done actually means.
I like that.
It outlines the criteria that must be met
Okay.
for an increment to be considered complete and potentially releasable.
So it's like a quality checklist.
Exactly. It's a guarantee of a certain level of quality and consistency.
That makes sense.
And a clear definition of done not only helps with quality, but also fosters transparency and accountability.
So it's really a key element of the whole Scrum process.
It is.
It seems like the Scrum Guide lays out a pretty clear path.
It does.
For teams to tackle these complex projects in a very collaborative, iterative, and transparent way.
Absolutely.
And it's all about creating this system that encourages continuous improvement.
Yes.
And delivering real value.
That's the goal.
Now, I'm curious, from your experience, what are some of the challenges teams face when they try to implement Scrum?
That's a great question, and one that we can explore further as we dive deeper into the nuances of Scrum.
Yep.
But before we move on, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what we've covered so far.
Okay.
What resonates with you the most about the Scrum framework?
I think what resonates with me most is how Scrum acknowledges that things change all the time.
Yeah.
It doesn't try to force you to have this perfect plan from the very beginning.
Right.
It builds in that space to inspect and adapt.
Absolutely.
I think that's so valuable these days.
Yeah.
When everything's moving so fast.
It is, yeah.
So we've covered, I think, the basic framework, the roles, the events, the artifacts. But I'm curious about the real world application.
Yeah.
Where do you see teams really struggling with Scrum?
One of the most common challenges I see is really embracing that self-managing aspect of Scrum teams.
Okay.
Organizations that are used to a more traditional, hierarchical structure, they often find it really difficult to kind of let go of that control.
Right. It's such a shift in mindset.
It is, yes.
For the team, but also for the organization.
Absolutely.
So how can teams navigate that transition?
It requires a conscious effort to empower team members.
Okay.
And really trust their expertise. The Scrum Master can help with that a lot, coaching the team and helping them develop those skills. They need to make those decisions on their own.
Right. So it's about giving them the tools and the support they need to actually be successful.
Exactly. Yeah. And creating that safe space for them to experiment.
What about the product owner? What are some things that they should watch out for?
One challenge for product owners is balancing the needs of stakeholders with the team's actual capacity.
Right.
They need to be able to say no sometimes, even to really powerful stakeholders.
Yeah, that's got to be hard.
It can be, yeah.
Especially when you've got people breathing down your neck.
Exactly, and, making sure the team isn't overloaded with work.
Right, so how do they deal with that? How do they, say no to those powerful stakeholders?
I think clear communication is key.
Okay.
The product owner needs to be transparent about, the team's workload and realistic about what can be achieved in a sprint.
Right. So setting those expectations early on.
Exactly.
What about the developers? What are some challenges that they typically face?
I think one challenge for developers is maintaining that sustainable pace throughout the sprint.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in the excitement of a new project and you want to do everything, but, that can lead to burnout.
Absolutely.
And missed deadlines.
So how do they avoid that trap of overcommitting?
I think one technique is breaking down the work into smaller, more manageable tasks during sprint planning. This allows for a more accurate estimation. And it helps the team identify potential roadblocks early on.
It's like that saying, how do you eat an elephant?
One bite at a time.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's important for developers to talk to each other about their workload and any challenges they might be facing.
So again, that transparency and communication.
Yes, communication is key.
Seems to be a theme.
It's the foundation of trust and collaboration.
Right, which is essential for Scrum.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Scrum events.
Okay.
You mentioned earlier that the daily Scrum can sometimes kind of turn into a status update meeting.
Yeah.
What are some other common pitfalls of the daily Scrum?
Another pitfall is when the daily Scrum turns into a problem-solving session.
Okay.
It can take up too much time and derail the team's focus.
Right. It's not the time or the place for that.
Exactly. It's a quick check-in.
Not a deep dive.
So you got to stay focused on the big picture.
Yes. And address those major obstacles.
Address any roadblocks, but don't get bogged down in the details.
Exactly. And the Scrum Master can help keep the meeting on track by making sure it stays within that 15-minute time box.
Okay.
And that the conversation is focused on those three key questions.
Yeah.
Now, what did you do yesterday? What are you doing today? Are there any impediments?
Okay. So what about the sprint review? What are some common mistakes teams make during that?
One mistake is treating the sprint review as just a formality,
Okay.
just a presentation to kind of check a box.
Right.
But it should be a valuable opportunity to get that feedback
Right.
from stakeholders and make adjustments to the product backlog based on that.
So it's a real conversation.
It is.
Be open to feedback, even if it's not positive.
Exactly. Yeah. And remember, it's not just for stakeholders. It's also a chance for the team to celebrate what they've achieved.
Recognize their accomplishments.
Absolutely.
I like that.
Okay. What about the sprint retrospective?
One common mistake I see during sprint retrospectives is focusing too much on the negative.
Oh, yeah.
It's important to identify areas for improvement, but it's also important to acknowledge what went well.
Right. Celebrate the wins.
Exactly. Celebrate the wins.
Keep that morale up.
Absolutely. And make sure that the sprint retrospective leads to those actionable steps.
Right.
It's not just about venting.
It's about taking action.
It is, yeah.
Okay, let's talk about the Scrum artifacts for a minute.
Okay.
You mentioned that the product backlog is this living document that evolves over time.
It does.
But how do you make sure that it stays relevant, like, as the project goes on?
That's where product backlog refinement comes in.
Okay, product backlog refinement.
This is an ongoing process where the product owner and the developers work together to review and refine that backlog, making sure that it's up to date, prioritized, and reflects the current understanding of the product.
So it's like a regular cleaning of the product backlog.
Yeah, you could say that.
Dusting things off.
Getting rid of the cobwebs.
Making sure it's all nice and tidy.
Exactly, and it's essential for keeping Scrum agile, responsive to change.
Now, you talked about the definition of done as being really important for quality.
Yes.
But what are some challenges teams face with that?
One challenge is striking the right balance between completeness and flexibility.
Okay.
The definition of done needs to be comprehensive enough to ensure that quality, but not so rigid that it stifles creativity.
Right, so it can't be like a straitjacket.
Exactly. Right. And it should evolve over time as the team learns and the product matures.
So it's another one of those living documents.
It is, yeah.
That needs to be, adapted as things change.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, what are some of the biggest misconceptions about Scrum that you've come across?
One misconception is that Scrum is only for software development. Right. But really, its principles and practices can be applied to any complex project.
So it's more of a mindset.
It is a mindset.
And a set of rules.
Absolutely.
Okay, what's another misconception?
Another misconception is that Scrum is a silver bullet.
Ah.
That will magically solve all your problems.
If only.
Right. But Scrum is a tool. It's a powerful tool.
It's not magic.
It's not magic.
Okay.
It requires commitment and collaboration.
And a willingness to change.
And a willingness to change, yes.
So it's really about creating the right environment.
It is.
For Scrum to work.
It's about fostering that right mindset.
And it's a journey, not a destination.
Absolutely. It's about continuous learning and improvement.
You're never really done.
Never done.
With Scrum.
Right. You're always striving to do better.
I like that.
Yeah. That's what makes it exciting.
Okay, well, we've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
Today, from the basic principles of Scrum to the challenges teams face when implementing it. But before we wrap up, I have one more question for you. So we talked about all the the benefits and everything, but is there ever a time when Scrum might not be the best approach?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Like, are there any red flags that would say maybe you should try something else?
I think Scrum really thrives in environments where there's a lot of complexity and a lot of uncertainty.
Okay.
So if you're working on a project that has a really clear scope and you know exactly what the outcome's going to be, maybe a more traditional, like, linear approach might be better.
So Scrum is really best for those projects where you don't know what's going to happen.
Exactly, yeah, where you need to be flexible.
You got to be able to adapt.
You got to be able to adapt, yeah.
Okay.
And Scrum relies heavily on that collaboration and self-management. So if you have a team that's not really, open to change, or doesn't have great communication skills, Scrum might not be the best fit.
Right, it's not a one-size-fits-all.
No, it's not.
You got to have the right environment.
Exactly. Yeah, you need the right ingredients for the recipe.
I like that.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of recipes, I'm sure you've seen this, but there's no such thing as like perfect Scrum.
No, there isn't.
Is there?
It's a process.
Right.
Every team's got to figure out what works for them.
It's all about adapting it to your specific context.
Yeah, find your own flavor.
Now, for our listeners who are like super intrigued
by
Scrum now and they want to learn more,
Okay.
what would you recommend? What should they do?
I think the best way to learn Scrum is to actually do it.
But-
Get your hands dirty.
Yeah.
There's a lot of resources available online. The Scrum Guide itself is a great place to start.
It's free.
It's free.
That's awesome.
And there's a ton of courses, online communities.
You got lots of places to connect.
Yeah, you can connect with other Scrum practitioners.
And if you're somebody who likes to, learn in person, there's also training courses.
Yeah, tons of training available.
And workshops and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really something for everyone.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to experiment,
Yeah.
Start small,
Okay.
maybe with a personal project.
Right.
And see how the principles of Scrum can help you.
Yeah, just try it out.
Yeah.
So it's all about taking those principles
Yeah.
and figuring out how they work for you.
Exactly. And remember, it's a journey, not a destination.
Right.
Be patient with yourself. Be patient with the process. And don't be afraid to make adjustments along the way.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation.
Yeah.
I'm really starting to see how these principles could apply, not just to work, but to life in general.
I think that's one of the coolest things about Scrum.
Yeah.
It's not just about work, it's a way of thinking.
It's a way of life.
It is. It's a way of life.
So it's about embracing change,
Yeah.
working together,
Collaborating.
and always trying to improve.
Continuously improving.
Well, I think we've really explored the depths of the Scrum Guide today.
I think so.
I hope our listeners feel like they can
Yeah.
go forth and start their Scrum journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And if they hit any roadblocks,
Yeah.
there's a whole community out there to help them.
That's right.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
we'll leave you with this final thought.
Yeah.
Think about those challenges you're facing. What's one principle from Scrum
Yeah.
that you could experiment with? How could you apply it to create a more, collaborative, adaptable, and value-driven approach
Good question.
to whatever you're working on?
Yeah, think about it.
Until next time,
Keep those deep dives coming.
keep learning.
Keep learning.
Thank you all. If you are looking to start your Scrum Master or Product Owner journey, check out our live project training and mentorship to get full hands-on knowledge. Feel free to reach us and join our free webinars. Check the details in description.